Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Maeve Marsden. I'm the Creative Director of Varuna, the National Writers' House, and the Blue Mountains Writers Festival, and I'll be your MC today for our wonderful event, Access Ideas and Insight, Reclaiming Words. To begin with, I'd love to invite Auntie Glenda Chalker to the stage for a welcome to country. Thanks, Auntie Glenda.
Thank you very much. Is that all? I didn't sound like it. Ingadi Boranga Marada Nangambi Nalawali Didjura Glenda Chalker, which means good day friend. My name is Glenda Chalker. I'm a Darrell woman of the Kubitjbada clan or the Cow Pastures tribe, descended from the traditional Aboriginal people who belong to this land where you all stand on or sit on here today in Campbelltown. I've been asked today to do a welcome to country. What is a welcome to country? In traditional times, it was a formal greeting for family and friends with singing and dancing. I'm not doing that today, sorry. Today, it is exactly the same as you greeting family and friends into your home. Only today, I'm greeting you to the country of my family. A welcome is to welcome you to the country of our ancestors and give you a safe passage and safe space whilst on this country, just as it did in traditional times. Country to Aboriginal people is not Australia. It is the country that our ancestors belonged to and where you belong. The country that provided all your needs to sustain life, food, water, medicine and shelter. It is a living entity that gives us all life, and we all belong to it even today. Today we must continue to look out for our next generation in maintaining the strength and vision along with our legacy for our children and grandchildren's future. We have no way of seeing what that future will be, but we must nurture our younger generations today so that they continue to know what we know. There is a wealth of knowledge in our community along with resilience. Australia always was and always will be Aboriginal land, for we have never ceded our sovereignty. We say we have been here since the beginning of time, and science has proved that we've been on this country for over 65,000 years. Let's be here for at least another 65,000. My ancestors are still with us today. They are part of me and they belong to this country. Today you all get to live on this beautiful land that my ancestors have tended for millennia. And so I say to you, Yulunga Nungawali Nuru, welcome to my country, to the traditional lands of my grandmothers and grandfathers who have gone before us on this place you all stand on. And I acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past and present, if there are any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here today, and all our non-Aboriginal friends here today also. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that welcome. This is Accessible Art's very first Western Sydney Access Ideas and Insights, and it's wonderful that we're kicking off here at Campbelltown Arts Centre on Dharawal land and in the heart of southwest Sydney. I mean, you all in the room know this about Campbelltown Arts Centre, but we do have 150 people watching online, so I'm providing a little context for them. So Campbelltown Arts Centre is a leading cultural institution known for its innovative programming, and right now they're currently installing the 2025 Fisher's Ghost Art Award, which opens on the 27th of September. So if you're local, please do check it out. Today's session focuses on reclaiming words, and I'm joined by three panellists who have so much to bring to this conversation. We got to have a little pre-Zoom, and it already sort of started kicking off with so many ideas that I was really excited to come and get to do it in a more formal setting. Here to my right, Hannah Diviney is a writer, disability advocate and actress. Many of you would have seen her on TV. She's brilliant. Robin M. Eames. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. A round of applause for those in the room, please. You didn't pay me. I mean, you can if you want to. You can buy me a cuppa afterwards. And you can applaud if you're sitting at home by yourself as well. Next along, Robin M. Eames is a poet and historian. A round of applause, please. And finally, Dr. Ayah Wehbe is a social researcher and writer as well. So some quick housekeeping before we begin. We will have time for questions at about the hour mark. If you're joining us online, you can submit your questions via Slido, and for those of you in the room, we'll bring a mic around. You can just raise your hand and we'll come to you. We have live captions and Auslan interpretation available throughout the event, so thank you to Georgia and Rebecca and Amanda for providing interpreting. These wonderful panellists are all independent writers and creatives, and the views we express today are our own rather than the views of Accessible Arts. Finally, as with any session that revolves around marginalisation and discrimination, some of today's content may be triggering for some in the room or for those watching at home. If that's the case, please feel free to step out and give yourself a break if you need. This should be a safe space where you're able to care for your well-being, so please do. We won't mind if you need to step out for a minute. Let's get into it. We've got lots to discuss. So today's about the language we use, words we claim or reclaim. And so I'd love to start with what seems on its surface a simple question, but isn't really, and that's what words you use to describe yourself. Hannah?
Oh, this feels like a question I would normally discuss with my therapist.
You can bring it up with her later if the answer you give doesn't go to plan.
Yeah, I think I might. I'm just like gonna earmark it for later. But I think the words I use to describe myself most often, at least in a professional sense, are probably the words you used earlier. Writer, actor, disability advocate. I find myself quite defined by the work that I do because it's so intrinsic to my life and it's not something that I can take off or take time away from necessarily. So it's not like a traditional 9 to 5 that kind of just hangs around and jumps out whenever I have a thought about something. But I guess in terms of me, myself, I would describe myself as disabled. That's definitely a word that I'm probably using, and I bring that up because I know that there are all sorts of debates around language and around other people and how comfortable they feel using certain words. Lots of able-bodied people feel the need to use differently abled around me. I can hear Robin laughing next to me, but basically I'm like, it's okay. You can call me disabled. Like, I know I am. I'm not gonna be offended. I'm well aware of the differences between you and me. So that's one thing. I guess, like in terms of how I describe myself, what I want to be known for is kind of being kind, being bold and adventurous, dreaming big, having lots of ambition, which aren't necessarily things we typically see in a disabled perspective. But yeah, I mean, there's probably 100 words I could use if I really sat down and thought about it. But those are great ones. Those are the main ones.
Yeah, those are really great ones. What about you, Robin?
I use a lot of different words depending on the context and depending on who I'm introducing myself to. Like Hannah said, I think in a professional setting, I would probably usually introduce myself as a poet and a historian because that's what I do. Although I hesitate to call either of them a day job because they don't really pay that well.
They kind of just exist nebulously, right?
Yeah, like it's an occupation, but is it a living? But yeah, I also call myself disabled. I know other people prefer person with disability, but in the same way that I call myself queer, and I wouldn't call myself a person with queerness, I don't really feel the need to separate myself from something that's such a intrinsic part of me. And I would also call myself queer crip, as crip has been used since around the 1980s as a reclaimed term from cripple, which has been in use since the 10th century. It's one of the oldest words around disability that we have, referring to people with movement disabilities. In other contexts, I might just call myself a hot mess. But, you know,
Did you say hot mess?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
I mean,
I
I'm pretty
wasn't sure if you
messy
said
today.
hot mess or hot mask, and I was like, both work.
Either or. I'm trans, I use they, them pronouns. I used to call myself genderqueer because that was kind of the term in vogue at the time, and now I tend to go with non-binary because it's what people understand. But again, I just, hot mess is the default.
I love this. Ayah, what words do you use to describe yourself?
Well, I spent the last 6 years trying to answer that question. And
now you have a doctorate in it.
Yeah, I know, thank you. Now I'm a doctor. I graduated last month, and that's a new, thank you. It's a new
PhD is a hard clap.
So yeah, that's a new thing that I need to kind of embrace myself. So I guess the most obvious thing is I'm a Muslim woman, I wear the hijab, but what's not very obvious is I have hearing loss, and the way that I describe or define my deafness really changes all the time, and all the different parts of the identity changes depending on who you're with or what the context is. I don't mind calling myself hard of hearing or hearing impaired or deaf with a small d, so it really depends. And I'm also Lebanese. My family came from Lebanon, and I grew up in Australia. So I would always say I'm an Australian Lebanese Muslim woman who had hearing loss. And again, it really depends on the context, and we are more than that. And sometimes I would say I'm a community leader or a researcher, but then we have so much other type of identities. And
Yeah, it's interesting, Ayah and Robin, you both referred to using different words in different contexts. And so I'm interested in terms of the words that you use to describe yourself, how often those are defined by other people, and how the words you use might differ from the society's labels that are given to you. Robin, did you want to speak to that?
Oh yeah, hugely. I think one of the major ones maybe is a phrase like wheelchair user, which is, I don't know, Hannah, but I would say that's fairly standard default language in community.
Yeah.
But for people who don't have many wheelchair users in their lives, that can be quite an alien phrasing, and they're more likely to say wheelchair bound or in a wheelchair.
In a wheelchair.
Yeah, and I really don't love either of them. I would say I actively dislike wheelchair bound because, we're not tied in or anything. And I guess I feel quite neutrally about in a wheelchair, but I'm also again, we're not glued in. It's not like you get fitted and then they're sort of, applying the super glue.
Could you imagine if that was the process? I just got this visual image of us all as children just being schlepped in.
Molded in.
But yeah, and it's also, I think people often don't have a lot of understanding about the idea that mobility aid usage is not static.
Yeah.
So we might use different mobility aids in different contexts. We might get around via a hoist, or for me, I sometimes use a cane or a crutch if I'm in a familiar environment where it's very short distances on flat ground. Yeah. And I guess, I've also had people sort of call me differently abled, and it makes me giggle because I'm well, I'm a poet.
I'm I see what you're trying to do, but
we all have different abilities.
It's not working.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all have different abilities, but some of them are subjugated.
How do you navigate it when someone uses language in front of you or about you that you don't... If someone calls you wheelchair bound, how do you respond?
I make fun of them.
You make fun of them? What about you?
Depends.
Well, you've got different
I'm not always
vibes.
mean.
So you make fun of them. If someone says that...
I'll make a joke.
Depends what the setting is, because I think there will be some times where I will pull someone aside and gently be hey, that's not how we do that. Or in some scenarios, because it might be a group setting, I will let it go, because I'm I don't want to make them feel uncomfortable in that way, because I know that they didn't intend.
I definitely...
It just depends on what the context is. But generally if it's someone working in disability, I'll be hey, just so you know, because then I'll be the context of the community is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm now regretting being a bully up front, because I think that's a much kinder and more applicable answer. But as you said, it's so context dependent, and if you have the opportunity to have,
have its place,
a quiet word with
because humour
someone,
immediately makes people feel comfortable in a way that explanation sometimes doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, I think my default thing to say is usually like, oh, actually the only time I've been wheelchair bound is when I accidentally tied myself to my chair with fairy lights on New Year's Eve in 2018, and then I had to go to the emergency ward the next morning because I turtled. I flipped backwards and caught myself in my hand and sprained my hand.
That is a good description of wheelchair bound.
And then I have the photo to back it up.
I want to bring Ayah into this discussion as well. When people do use language for you that doesn't feel like it aligns with your experience or your identity, what's your approach? How do you respond?
I think for me, you have to understand that I come from different cultural groups as well as different. And so, for example, I'm part of the deaf community that grew up in and out, and then the Lebanese community, Muslim community, Australian community, and academic communities. So they all have different kind of maybe understanding when it comes to understanding disability and deafness and things like that. And they have different, I guess, perspectives. So I guess, for example, even in my research, so let's say, for example, the first time that people get diagnosed with something like hearing loss, it's from the medical, like the doctor. He's like, you're hearing impaired or you're deaf. But then some people from the deaf community might find that offensive and be like, we're not hearing impaired. There's nothing wrong with us. We're hard of hearing, and they use other terms to define themselves. But for people who are from culturally, linguistically diverse backgrounds, they don't really have access to the deaf community or those understanding. So the first point of contact is the doctor. So like, I'm hearing impaired. This is something I have. And so there's that kind of element to it. And obviously from the research point of view, the research and stuff is all about trying to identify people and things like that. But some of the people I interviewed myself or that I've interacted with, they don't really take identity language discourse as strongly as maybe we do in Western society and stuff. So sometimes just have this thing about what's more important is the barriers, challenges that we face. And for people from very marginalized communities, we have so many different identities that trying to, we are one person, but with many parts to our identities and marginalization. And that, I think one other example of a context that we were talking about as well is, I would say, for example, government, for example, Centrelink, so like your disability, you have to kind of prove yourself, but we don't always fit those boxes. And then in other situations, it could be like where you are, who you're with, and what it surfaces in different situations, and that's some of the findings that I find in my research.
Yeah. I mean, disability exists as a concept differently in different languages and cultures, as you're saying.
Some languages don't even have a word for it. If you look at the majority of First Nations languages, there isn't a word for disability, which is something I'm fascinated by, because it also has occurred to me over my 26, I had to think about that for a second, that's embarrassing, years of being a disabled person, obviously, that I don't know, and obviously no one is beholden to define themselves a certain way in front of me, but to my knowledge, I haven't met anyone who I outwardly was able to tell were both disabled and First Nations individuals.
Oh, so you just haven't had that conversation about how the language and identity...
Well, I just haven't met anyone who I, at least as an outsider, could identify that way.
Visibly, yeah. I mean, the language question is so interesting, and I think you were sort of touching on that before, where it's not just about how disability is described in different cultural contexts, but also how it's experienced. Where's my little question, because I got distracted listening. Yeah, how does that impact the way that you create understanding and kind of community dialogue within both your cultural and disability contexts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess growing up, because I'm a Muslim woman as well, and I'm from Lebanese background, growing up in Australia, because I had that, I didn't really know where I fit, and sometimes I didn't understand things like racism or the intersectionality and the challenges from my younger age. Now I know because I'm a researcher and I went and studied that. But growing up, I didn't kind of know who I am, my identity, my belonging. But I found it important for me to meet other people who are also like me in the sense of either deafness or cultural background and things like that, and having that understanding that we're not alone, no matter what it is, and the help that to the identity and the collective identity. But I think also now I'm struggling with also trying to understand that people are so different and understanding is different. You have to sometimes explain, but sometimes don't have to explain. But I think it really does depend. And the language does impact the culture. And like for example, from the Islamic point of view, the Holy Quran also doesn't have a word for disability in there. And that was something I did in my early research about. Obviously, the Holy Quran is in Arabic, very complex form of Arabic, but it was very different to what was spoken at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They were using other words to say that a deaf person. It was a different word, and that word is not in the Holy Quran. So it kind of gives you the impression that Islam as a religion is very positive, but it's just the cultural understanding, upbringing. Every family, every culture has different understanding and upbringing and whatnot, and that's what I think that maybe stigma or that kind of comes in. And I had growing up sometimes, the identity that people give me, and then the identity that I kind of have want to choose for myself. And as a Muslim woman, I face things like Islamophobia, barriers, people kind of trying to make decisions for me, or they would see my hijab before they would see my hearing aids and cochlear implants. So it's one of the interesting things I had to experience. But I guess now it's just reclaiming like that identity and telling people this is who I am, and this is, it doesn't really matter. But for me, what's important to me is I'm a Muslim woman, faith is important to me, and I'm also a person who's deaf. I'm not ashamed of that. It's a big part of me. I can't imagine myself not being deaf or hard of hearing.
How does Auslan then intersect with those experiences and those identities? Because then we move into a gestural language that I imagine would be a whole different way of communicating with your communities.
Oh, sorry. I'm not very good with microphones because I can't hear. Before we get into that, I want to say I know about 4 languages, maybe. So I grew up speaking Arabic with my mom.
Yeah.
And I learned English in school. And I went to hearing support unit that had teacher of the deaf, and that's where I learned Auslan sign language. But it didn't really mean I was active Auslan used until very recently. So I didn't really use sign language until the last 5 years. And that's when I started to be more involved in the deaf community and meet so many different people. So it just changed over the time. And I had to learn international sign language for academic conferences, to share my research, and meet people around the world in international sign language. But in Auslan, it's just that community feeling. You can connect to people from similar backgrounds as you or similar experiences as you. And sometimes, like, when I got too tired from lip reading or trying to focus all the time, I find Auslan just easier. But it doesn't mean everyone I know in my life uses sign language. So it's just one of the languages that I know. And Auslan is, a lot of people don't understand that every country has its own sign language. So I have to explain to people, I don't know Arabic sign language, it's a whole different language.
I feel like 4 languages is already quite a few. You're ahead of the rest of us.
As someone who only speaks 1, I'm like, what do you mean you speak 4?
Thank you. Robin, in your work, you've explored poetry as a language of disability. So does that mean you get to claim 2 languages?
Oh, I wouldn't be brave enough.
Yeah. Could you explain what this means? How did you come to think of poetry as a language of disability?
I think it's a very figurative form of expression. As a genre, it is fundamentally one where we play with the boundaries of speech, we play with the structure and the rules of language and how we talk, how we tell stories. Poetry is the oldest form of history. It's the oldest form of record keeping. We have oral storytelling on this continent, going back a very, 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 very long time, and way more accurate than written histories because it's alive. Whereas then if you look at different areas around the world, we still tend to find that oral storytelling is the oldest form of storytelling, often put to song, sometimes recorded later in a written format. But I would say modern poetry is maybe a little bit less historical, but speaking to a lot of different areas, often it's a way that we can experiment or speak truth to power. I think particularly I have a lot of respect for disabled poets who, play with language in a way that is so novel and so interesting, and particularly people who have speech disabilities or cognitive disabilities or who are deaf, who write poetry in sign language is so beautiful. I always love seeing...
I hadn't thought of that.
Oh yeah, there's a huge community of, deaf slam poetry events. Smaller community here maybe, but, we find poetry in a lot of different formats, in a lot of different places and times, and it is also fundamentally a community building thing. And you'll find a lot of famous poets are also organisers, like Audre Lorde, and I've forgotten every poet I've ever known, but Lizzie Jarrett and Evelyn Araluen and every other poet.
We believe you've heard of poets. It's fine.
It's okay.
I warned Maeve about this earlier. I was like, if I have to list anything, I'm going to forget everything I've ever known on the spot, and it always happens. But
I think they were 3 very solid poets that you just listed. I think we're okay. From a historical perspective, and I'm going to stay with you, Robin, for a moment, how have and I love this idea of poetry as not just being language, but also organising and community building. And we see it historically, but also in a contemporary context, that so much Australian poetry is incredibly political.
Oh, yeah, Kerry Shang, Andy Jackson.
There we go. Yeah.
More poets, more community builders.
Incredibly sort of political and visceral in what it does for communities, especially marginalised communities. But how have gaps or limitations in language, historically, been used by artists and advocates to create new words? Like what, in a kind of the nuts and bolts of language, the little units that we use to build sentences, how do we create new words or reshape ideas or challenge, I can't talk today, challenge dominant narratives in the words that we use? Did that question make sense?
Oh, it makes sense.
Great.
I think Ayah might be a better place to answer that than I am.
Well, you can both answer it.
Not a linguist, but certainly I don't know, because historically speaking, people use all sorts of different language in different periods, and the language around disability, we tend to see what we call sort of a euphemism treadmill. So
I like that.
Yeah, because it just keeps, we
yeah.
replace a word with something that's softer, and then that becomes a slur, and then we replace that with something else, and then that becomes a slur, and it's almost like the problem isn't the language, it's the
attitude behind it.
It's the attitudes behind it. It's the
connotation, desire
to subjugate and marginalise based on othering certain groups of the population, based on creating a divide between normal and abnormal. And one example is the R slur, which just means slow.
That was the R slur, started
out as a euphemism that then in turn became derogatory. And, I think if you give it long enough, differently abled would become derogatory as well. So there's a point where, there are some terms that people don't try to reclaim, certainly, but there are other terms like queer, like crip, like disabled, where I think it becomes about community, and it becomes about finding each other, and it becomes about saying, well, that's actually our word, and it's up to us to decide what meaning we give it.
Yeah. Hannah, in recent years, speaking of slurs,
oh boy,
you've led campaigns. Yes. No, but this is some pretty impactful activism you've done.
I just find it kind of hilarious to talk about this in relation to all of that, because it's just, that seems so superfluous.
No, well,
I mean,
the audience don't know what we're talking about yet. So let me get the question out. Because some of you may have seen online, Hannah's led campaigns calling for artists like Lizzo and Beyonce to change ableist lyrics in their songs. The campaign sparked international conversations and led to change. That's not superfluous. Like that is major artists on a massive scale. I'd like to know, and without putting yourself down, what impact do you think it has? That's for the therapy.
Now you figured out my party trick, babe.
I want to hear about the impact on culture, or maybe it's easier for you to talk about how it felt for you when you put forward a campaign to say this language isn't okay, and change happens.
We'll take a step back for a minute, and I will clarify what word I'm talking about here, just for everyone in the room and everyone online, and this will be the only time I use it. But basically, Lizzo and Beyonce both used the word spaz in the songs, which many of us in the disabled community know is short for spastic, which unfortunately has this kind of
messy history.
Yeah. Messy history, and it's somehow morphed into this cultural shorthand for like out of control, overly emotional, someone who lacks intelligence, like all of those kind of very derogatory terms and meanings. Whereas for someone like me, I have cerebral palsy, and the specific form of cerebral palsy that I have is spastic diplegic cerebral palsy, where spastic refers to spasticity, or this kind of unending, constant tightness in my muscles that I can't do anything about, that is engaged 24/7 and is unfortunately a part of my everyday life, whether I want it to be or not. So in that context, spastic being used in the cultural way doesn't sit well with me, and it was a word that I had thrown at me in the past by children in the playground, people who didn't necessarily know what they were saying, but they knew enough to know that using that particular word aimed at me would hurt. So when Lizzo used the slur in her song, I thought that kind of felt very very much the opposite of how I perceived Lizzo to be, in that she was at that stage promoting
body positivity
and acceptance and all of that. The jury's out on whether that is still the case, but that's another conversation. We could have a whole panel about that. So I wrote a tweet, kind of very gently but firmly called her out and said, look, I kind of expect you to do better, because how do you not know? Like, I get that you might not know that this is a slur, but I know that when a song comes out, it is seen and heard by so many people in your team. Surely somebody should have flagged that, hey, in 2022, we probably don't want to use language like that. So anyway, I tweeted, done it thousands of times, didn't think anything of it. Went to pick up my phone a few hours later and was like, ow, that's hot. Wait, why is that hot? Why did my phone just like burn me? Looked down and was like, oh no. And back then, like, it was Twitter, so it was just the blue like bird notifications, and I was like, what's happening? And I kind of clicked on it, and I'm like, oh no, this wasn't supposed to happen. Because I should point out that, like, when I called Lizzo out on it, I didn't really have an end goal in mind. Like, I wanted to bring attention to it and raise her awareness of the issue, but I wasn't necessarily expecting her to change the lyric. Didn't know that was a thing that could easily be done in songs. Now I do. But yeah, and it kind of got to the point where there was suddenly all this press and media, and people started trolling me and using words and language in a very hurtful, specifically designed to make you feel small and all of that kind of way. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, this has been seen by so many people that someone who knows Lizzo is going to find this. And then what do we do once that happens? Because I've got to be honest, any reaction that I was expecting was like one of those celebrity apologies. We all know the ones where it's like, I'm sorry you felt offended. That's not what I meant. Like, pull yourself together. Like, stop being such a baby. I was like, oh, this is going to be a disaster. And then a couple of days later, I got a text from a friend, and it just said in all caps, "Go to her Instagram. She's changing it." And I was like, what, whoa. And then there's a whole, like, permanent post on her grid that said, "Look, I understand that, like, language has been used against me in ways that I haven't liked. I didn't intend for this to cause that harm. I'm going to change it. It's easy peasy. Don't worry about it." And then, like, the New York Times emailed me, and anyone who knows me knows that, like, the New York Times is, like, the holy grail. Like, I wanted to be a writer since I was 4 years old, so, like, the New York Times, I'm like, ah. So when I got the email from this reporter, supposedly at the New York Times, I was like, someone is messing with me. One of my cousins has decided, like, this would be a really...
They've set up a New York Times email address just to troll you.
This would be a really cool practical joke. So I've, like, Googled the reporter expecting nothing to come up. And then, like, their official page of bylines at the New York Times come up, and I was like, oh no, this is real. Oops, like, that wasn't supposed to happen. And then 6 weeks after that, when Lizzo kind of gave everyone the masterclass in how to be gracious and how to respond well and be an ally and all of the things, someone tweeted me and was like, "So you're going to call out Beyonce now?" And I was like, what? Like, I don't know if anyone has ever had the sensation of being in a lift and just feeling like your stomach drop, or like being at the top of a roller coaster, looking down and being like,
here we go.
Oh boy. Like, it's just not going to... And I remember going... like, looking at what they were talking about, going, please let them be wrong, please let them be wrong, please let them be wrong, and then being like, oh, damn it, it's not, she did it, like, ah! And I remember being angrier that time around because I was like, it's not like the Lizzo thing happened in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Like, the whole world, inadvertently, whether I meant them to or not, saw that.
Yeah.
So for you to then make that decision and not catch it before you released it feels a little more like above the rules kind of thing, which again perhaps matches with Beyonce's like mythical, mysterious
status, yeah.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a really
Thank you.
interesting...
That was a roller coaster ride.
So
I knew what the outcome was, and I was still in the story.
And then I just remember like going downstairs to my mum, who is a very practical, pragmatic woman. Like, she's the kind of person who, when I would say as a kid, why isn't there ever a good news channel? Like, what's wrong with the news that it's always all the bad stories, which I still say to her now, but back then. And she'd go, well, you could make one.
Yeah.
Like, that was her response.
That explains a lot about the career you've ended up with.
It does,
if that's your mum's attitude to a complaint. Go then, do it yourself.
It does explain a lot.
Yeah.
But I remember coming downstairs and being like, Mom, Beyonce has done the thing. Do I have to call out Beyonce now? I don't want to. Her fans are so scary.
Oh, gosh.
The beehive, I don't want to do it. And then she goes, you have to. And
you can't do Lizzo and not Beyonce.
I know, but it's just going to...
Start the whole thing again.
And also, like, because of the sheer coincidence of the fact that Lizzo and Beyonce are both women of colour, there was an argument that in African American vernacular English, spaz didn't mean what I was saying it did, and that I was racist. I got called a Karen a lot. One particularly memorable insult was being called the poster child of white privilege. And I remember reading that and going, I feel like there are a few people in that particular queue ahead of me right now. But sure, if you want to call me the poster child.
It's so interesting, but I mean, this is what we were talking about earlier about how much language is contextual, and that it ideally in any conversation about language and marginalisation, we can hold all of these things and juggle them and work out, like it doesn't have, there's not a clear ranking, there's not a queue to be on the poster.
No,
I mean, Ayah, you do activism on social media as well, so you do community engagement and you've spoken a little about your research. What strategies do you find most effective when promoting inclusive language in different spaces, and how do your strategies differ depending on if you're having a conversation with someone or accidentally tweeting a massive campaign?
So I started my Facebook page in 2014, and back then people were in blogs and like long kind of sharing experiences and things, and I thought at the time, because there's not much awareness about someone who's deaf, Muslim, from different cultural backgrounds, challenges, the stigma, and so many different types of stigma and things that's happening. And I just started to kind of, just start sharing my experiences from there. And that was Facebook. And then it kind of evolved over time as well. So now I've kind of made a bit of a name for myself, or a reputation for myself. When we talk about social media as well, I've noticed as well, different social media has different purpose, and that could be challenging, trying to be accessible for all of them or some of them. So when I started Facebook page, it was mostly blogs and writing. But then when I got into like Instagram, it's photos and videos, and then sometimes I try to make my videos as accessible as possible, and put captioned or do sign language or things like that. And really, again, depend on the context or image description on Instagram. So there's a lot of things, and sometimes I feel like it's too much work to try and remember all the access needs that you need, and then I probably don't end up putting, or depend on what, So I feel like, I didn't have a plan for that. It's just kind of progressed, and as my research progressed, as my community work and leadership progressed, it kind of merged all together. Maybe going forward, I need to do a better plan. But I've always been very, open about my experiences and the language that I use, and sometimes just a matter of just me posting a photo and showing people I'm here doing everyday normal things is so important and impactful. And I get so many people inbox me that it's just that connection, that they don't have someone similar background as them, or a teacher that wants more information, or a support worker that wants the deaf community or deaf Muslim community, and I can't time to help them. So I've taken on a lot of different roles, but I try to kind of remind myself what is, my purpose of that post or of that platform that I'm using, and it would help to have a strategy as well. And I think social media and language is always going to evolve as well, and even sign language itself evolved, and the language that we use in sign language. Back in the past in Auslan and other languages, the sign language for disability used to be like this. So that means like someone that had no arm, for example. But over time, they've changed it to disability, so like the D and diversity of different disabilities. That has been adopted in Australia and some countries, but when I was overseas in some countries, they're still using the old sign because they don't have, so I actually made it upon myself to get up and tell everyone, please don't use that sign. Think of another sign for your own country, or use the universal, And another sign that I didn't like in the Auslan language was for Muslim. So they used to say Muslim like this, like wearing the burqa. And I used to find it offensive because it's just taking the media stereotype. Less than 1% of Muslim women wear a burqa. It doesn't represent Muslim men and women wearing a burqa. So the deaf community themselves said Muslim, that's the sign because when you pray. Or the universal sign for Muslim is Muslim, like the moon. So sometimes even in sign language we have to be inclusive, and the best way is to ask the deaf, like when it comes to sign language specifically, you have to ask the deaf people to come up with the signs, or what signs do they use. And I guess my next challenge now is to kind of create a glossary, hopefully, of sign language words in Australia, apart from Islamic or Muslim context. But we need to ask our deaf community or deaf Muslim users, what terms do they use in our, in Australian sign language? Do they borrow from overseas, from other Muslim countries? Do we come up with our own? So we came up with Ramadan Mubarak, for example. So Ramadan is the sign for fasting, and then this means congratulations. So that's something that we and I've started to kind of promote that in my social media. And then the people started to be like, oh wow, what's the other signs for like Islam or Hajj or other concepts or language? I'm like, okay, that's great, but I need to like go back to my community because I'm not a fluent Auslan user. So even though I am deaf and it's really important to get the input from the community themselves and hopefully do like a project in glossary and then start sharing it. So sometimes it's also about being a leader, but also listening to what the people want from those communities, I think is important.
Yeah, that's so great. Thank you. Some of the things you're saying about not just reclaiming language, but also like having to invent new terms and stuff reflects conversations I've listened to where people talk about First Nations languages and inventing words for computer, or even Australia, that, you know, like that when you're looking at languages that have these fascinating histories.
Can I interrupt? The sign language of Australia, the First Nation deaf community came up with Australia like this. So the old sign used to be Australia, and that sign came from when the convict came in the boat and people were dropping off people, and I didn't know the meaning. So the new sign is Australia. So even for me, I'm trying to adopt the new sign for Australia.
Oh, it's so interesting. Thank you.
There's also a lot of evolving language around like queer and that sort of thing. I was very pleased when I learned that wheelchair users just this and not like this. Because I was like, it's actually about the movement, although I don't know what maybe the older terminology would have been or if that's specific to Sydney dialect or anything.
As a side note though, like I find image descriptions so confusing to try and write.
Trying to write image descriptions.
Yeah, because I go, how do I do this in a way that describes what
is relevant.
What is relevant, but isn't overly complicating it.
Yeah.
And isn't accidentally condescending.
Yeah, interesting.
I think I had to learn the formula and just be like subject, action, context, and learn to keep it concise because otherwise I would, you know, I'm not very good at analysing.
And then sometimes if there's like multiple people in a photo, I'm like, how do I describe like spatial? Yeah.
I mean, some of that sort of pressure to do things correctly ties into a question that I was about to ask you as well, Robin, which is, and Ayah was talking about the pressure to do things right, you know, to always get things right and to
always be like the perfect disability advocate or the perfect user of language. Or
And that pressure is something that often people from within marginalised communities put on themselves more than privileged people ever do. How do we handle the tension, Robin, between striving for perfect or correct language and the reality that words are often imperfect tools for our lived experience anyway?
I think where I've come to is I want to embrace the messiness of it all and the complexity, but also I want to make sure that I am staying accountable to my communities and also to communities that I don't belong to. And I think, you know, that's the balance for me. It's not about getting it right or being cancelled. It's about doing my best and being in community and being in meaningful community and being in,
and also being transparent about things you don't know how to
totally do. Being willing to say the limits of your knowledge and being willing to learn and grow. And I think we need to extend that to each other as well, you know, with limits. But like, I thought it was so interesting what you were talking about earlier because, you know, the Cerebral Palsy Alliance used to be called the Spastic Centre, and that was the subject of a lot of organising, some of the earliest radical disability organising in Australia. And, you know, that really harmful, degrading language that excludes us can be sometimes the fuel for our radical movements and collective action, which I think is quite beautiful. And I had another point and I'm just trying to hold it all together in my head.
That's great.
But, where was I going? I mean, in my research, I think because I'm researching trans history in late 19th, early 20th century Australia and medical and carceral interactions as well as community interactions and newspaper scandals.
Piece of cake.
Oh yeah. No, I've been talking to my therapist about all the vicarious trauma as well. But you know, one of the things that's been really interesting in a learning process for me is reading through all of these old institutional records from lunatic asylums in the 1880s and 1870s. And in Melbourne, there was an idiot asylum.
Idiot asylum.
Idiot was the word they used for intellectual disability, congenital idiocy. To them, there were 4 types of lunacy, and it was mania, dementia, melancholia, and idiocy. And so, I think idiot is a word that people tend to, today, because it's a couple centuries later, today people think of it as quite a mild insult, right? It's not something that would be censored on TV. But to some of the people in our community, it's not as distant.
I didn't realise.
Well, moron, imbecile, a lot of the words that we use to degrade people have their roots in disability.
Well, even demented from the list that you just said. It's interesting that melancholia is the only one that, from that list, that hasn't sort of become a slur.
Yeah.
Which is strange.
Stop
I think
being so melancholic, damn it.
It doesn't quite have the same impact. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, but I found that I am just unable to use the word idiot anymore because I know too much about its history, but I'm also conscious that most of the people I know who use that term in everyday speech don't know its history.
And aren't using it to be like nefarious necessarily.
And
or
equally,
to be like cruel.
And equally, I think it's not necessarily up to me to police people, but it's also not up to me to decide when a term has lost its sting. And particularly when it's a word that doesn't affect me. And when a lot of these terms were still used in diagnostic criteria, within people's lifetimes, within people's memories. So that's one where I'm conscious, again, of the limits of my knowledge, and I try to listen and engage with people with intellectual disabilities who have very strong feelings around that kind of language. But I also am conscious that it's not something I necessarily want to police, or it's not a moment for me to kind of...
to be so afraid of language that, like...
Well, exactly. You don't want people to be, and that's how we get differently abled, right?
Stop communicating.
Exactly. And to me, I think if you're in that conversation, if you're willing to have that conversation, if you're willing to be open about it, to discuss the complexities, then that's a great starting point.
Yeah. This we're going to get to audience questions in just a minute. So if you're watching online, please do type them into Slido, and if you're sitting in the audience, start to have a think of if you want to ask one. But, I think what you're both describing is a kind of an ideal for how people can engage with critique. That it can be a privilege to get kindly called out and then to kind of reconsider how you've engaged. Looking to the future, sort of seeing the activism that's come before us, the words that have been reclaimed or claimed or that we should be putting on the shelf and never revisiting again. What shifts in language around disability and deaf experiences would you like to see, and how can artists and community leaders actively shape that evolution?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah, how do we fix the future? Go. We've got 5 minutes left.
I think part of it has to come from increased representation just as a starting point, because the more access and exposure that both disabled and non-disabled audiences have to disabled stories, to disabled experiences, to the fact that even within our community we can all sit here and be asked the same question and have different opinions, that we're not like a monolith or a hive mind, which is something I am continually explaining to people, that will help. And I think, unfortunately, so much of what the world understands about disability, at least socially, has been dictated from the point of view of how it makes others feel or how it impacts others. So, like, a lot of the time, the kind of dominant narrative has been, like, the tragedy of disability, or, like, people's kind of palpable relief that it's not their life, and like the gratitude that inspires, or the inspiration they get from that.
The inspiration narrative, yes.
Yeah, the inspiration porn. I should explain what that is for anyone who doesn't know. So, inspiration porn was a term coined by the late, great Stella Young, and it was basically a phrase she created to describe the unique experience of a disabled person doing something that is fairly everyday, like going grocery shopping, for example, and being congratulated by people being out and about on the street for being out and about on the street, or like, it's great to see you doing stuff, and all you're doing is like crossing the road with your eggs and milk. And it's like, congratulate me when I've done something worthy of that. And then you have that like in juxtaposition with the fact that like the main avenue for representation for the longest time has been Paralympic achievement.
Super Crips.
Which, yeah, the Super Crip. I'm just going to use that from now on, because that just explains so much more in just a simple word. And I think that's also really, really damaging in the way that, like, being an ordinary... I always say that being an ordinary disabled person is perfectly okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I think we've created this, like, binary of you either achieve nothing and are invisible, or you achieve everything and are a peer.
I mean, it's interesting in an arts context as well, with you being a writer and an actor, and I think that lens sometimes gets applied to career achievements for you as well. Like, either it's a wild hit or you're a starving artist, and we do often have binaries for how things operate. Ayah, to the future of language around disability and deaf experiences, what would you like to see, and how can we shape that?
I agree, representation is important. Like Sydney, for example, is one of the most multicultural cities in the world, but we don't have much representation for religious cultural groups and disability as well. And I just want to talk about, you're talking about pressure that we feel, because we're in this like space most of the time, we're trying to advocate for so many different communities, and we have to do a lot of work, emotional labour to teach so many different communities and things like that. And sometimes it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So if I speak up, or if I don't, like, I speak up, I might change, but I'm tired. If I don't speak up, nothing's gonna happen. So it's a little bit of like, I guess, give people the space that they need, but also be aware that we have so much trauma, baggage to kind of unpack. So we still need to kind of give people with disability and people from culturally linguistic diverse backgrounds more opportunities, more of a platform, more space, more job opportunities, I guess more upskilling them, and more leaders in the community than, you know what I mean, so just kind of raising the level up a little bit. And also I agree with what you said, sometimes I feel like I have to be so amazing to kind of get recognition, but not having that inspirational pity kind of element. So it's like, it's never enough, or it's not like, I'm always working all the time, but I feel like the work is never ending. But yeah, and I'm just, it's hard for me to sometimes, like, especially now, because I'm going to be about adjustment period, finishing my PhD and going out into the real world now, but it's just a bit of like, we need space to also celebrate all of our achievements, but also doing everyday things and just being who we are, and just letting people know that we are just the same as everyone else. We just have a little bit of differences, but we want to be accepted and treated the same as everyone else.
Robin, you're a historian, but if you could give us a poetically resonant future.
I have a complicated answer to this, because
I'm shocked to hear that you have a complicated answer.
I think representation is obviously part of it. The stories we tell are really important, and that can be an entry point for how people understand us and each other.
And I should also clarify, like, I mean representation is in, like, even literally, like, if you're a disabled person existing on the street, like, or existing out in the world, like, I want you to be able to see other disabled people just out in the world living their lives.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want the only access we really have to disabled people or disabled community being in situations like this, where it's super specific, or in therapy settings.
Yeah.
It's a great lead into my next point, because the next point was material change on every level, and acting in solidarity with other marginalised communities, because our struggles are tied up with every other struggle. It is the same structures oppressing us. It is.
And we also exist at the intersection of every other marginalised community.
Yeah, and
there is.
disability rises with marginality. Rates of disability are higher in First Nations communities. Disablement we're seeing is being used as a tool of war in Palestine, and in so many aspects of our lives, there are so many experiences that we don't share as disabled people, but there are also so many experiences that overlap because, everyone experiences sickness, illness, disability at some point in their lives. It is part of the natural variation of human experience. But we don't build a world that everyone can live in, and we don't build a world where everyone can have an equitable experience or, receive justice, receive liberation, have access to community. And a lot of us are out there feeling very alone and feeling like disability is a very individual experience, whereas I like to think of it as a call to action, a responsibility, a commitment to my community. And I think every little thing that we do in every little sphere is, movement towards that more liberatory future.
An excellent note to end on. Thank you both. Thank you, all three of you, so much. Do we have some questions from the room or from online? We've got one. Oh, yes, we definitely do. We'll bring a microphone. Try to keep your questions succinct so that we can get through as many people as possible.
G'day. I'm just